Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Exorcism Files, True Stories of Demonic Possession, by Blai, narrated by Lyle Blaker. Preface. It is human nature all the way back to Adam and Eve. We do not like to be told what to do. More than that, we are suspicious of anyone who says they know better than we do. When other people struggle at going it alone, we assume it is their problem, and probably their own fault. We think we will not make the same mistakes, or we are simply stronger than they. So into the world we go, making our own choices, each of us reinventing the wheel. Of course, there are many who take advantage of this tendency toward willfulness and suspicion in order to shape our ideas and our views, and to exploit our naivete for their own profit. Eventually, hopefully, life trades youth for wisdom, and we start to see the value in the rules of morality and propriety our forebears tried to pass down to us. We can see this part of our fallen nature playing out in the secularization of our civilization. The warnings against sin and falsehoods, and especially the dark supernatural powers that exist in our world that used to be baked into society, are no longer passed down, and they are no longer reflected in our stories and traditions. Even the clergy these days are rarely trained in the reality of the spiritual world. Many Catholics, lay and clergy, are simply embarrassed to openly take the spiritual seriously. We have wandered away from our spiritual traditions and forgotten the lessons from millennia of experience. Though we may have left behind the supernatural, it has not left us behind. Religion used to provide answers and rituals to help us understand the things we cannot understand with only our wits and our senses. Now, increasingly, we search for answers in ways previous generations knew to be dangerous, and so we play with spiritual forces we do not understand and cannot control. This book is not about telling you what to do or not to do, at least in the sense of a collection of rules. We know that does not cut it in today's world. Instead, this book is about telling stories, real stories, my stories, about the reality of the spiritual world and the dark forces that move about in that world and influence this one. These stories may not prove the old warnings and lessons about the spiritual world in a strictly scientific way, but my hope is that they will demonstrate the wisdom of the past and make the intangible feel, maybe for the first time, real. Now, what about the harm that could be done in relaying true stories about the dark powers? This is a concern that has given me pause over the years. I absolutely do not want to encourage people to interact with these spiritual creatures, but only and always to seek God. I do not want to inspire amateur dabblers who think they are competent to confront or control fallen angels. These stories clearly illustrate that these creatures are evil and purely destructive. Without fail, those who have been freed from their grasp wish to warn the world about what got them into trouble and to never, ever try to contact or converse with them again. I have also been very careful not to include any identifying information in these accounts. Therefore, in most cases, I have changed details such as names, places, and dates, so that the stories are complete but do not expose particular people. The exceptions are cases I worked on that have been discussed publicly elsewhere. Where it made narrative sense, I have also combined multiple stories into one. One last note. You might suppose that the stories included here are unusual or extraordinary in some way. It is true that I tried to pick interesting ones, but the fact is, these stories are representative of many, many more cases that will never be published. Introduction. Before we jump into these stories, some basic background information may be helpful. The focus of this book is the troublesome, deceptive spirits that humankind has dealt with from the very beginning. In Christianity, they are called fallen angels, or demons. In Islam, they are called jinn, or shaitan. In Judaism, they are called diabolic. In some branches of Buddhism, they are called animal spirits, and in Native American religions they have various names depending on the tribe. Further, there is some version of an exorcist in all these traditions. people who have the knowledge and power to drive away these spirits from the people whom they are troubling. These cases are usually rare, and this driving away usually takes the form of a religious ceremony or rite that is considered a difficult and somewhat dangerous thing to do. These stories come from the Roman Catholic tradition, though they touch on other traditions in a few cases. The Catholic Church has been doing exorcisms since its establishment by Jesus Christ, who gave explicit instructions to his church to cast out demons. 7 of the major miracles recounted in the Gospels are exorcisms, and exorcism was already well known to the Jewish people in the time of Jesus. There were Jewish exorcists operating in society before and during his time. Over the centuries, the Church developed and then standardized the exorcism rite, a fixed ritual with a precise text and instructions to take certain actions. She also gradually restricted who could do exorcisms, and when. Today, we have an old exorcism rite from 1614 and a revised one from 1999. The old rite first has the solemn exorcism, which can only be used for a possessed person. This rite can only be done by a priest with permission from their bishop. If someone else attempts to use it, he will have no authority over the fallen angels, and the experience will likely end very badly for that person. The rite is quite long. Solemn exorcisms generally last between 1 and 3 hours, or even longer per session. It is a Hollywood myth that exorcisms are over in one dramatic prayer session. They can take from 1 session to years of weekly sessions, depending on the person and how many demons have taken up residence in them. The bishop, meanwhile, only gives permission to use the solemn exorcism after there is enough evidence to have moral certainty that the person truly is possessed. There are 4 classic signs of possession that can give us that certainty. These were developed over many centuries of experience by a church that was skeptical and trying to debunk claims of possession, not because church leaders did not believe in the demonic, but because they knew, even centuries ago, that there were often other explanations for the claims of the, quote, possessed. And to perform a solemn exorcism on someone who does not need it, besides being a waste of time, can confirm the person in their delusion or other conditions and distract from the help they really need. The 4 signs of possession are understanding and speaking all languages, knowing secret details the person could not know by natural means, reacting against the holy, objects, persons, and so on, and strength beyond their physical condition. First, fallen angels know all languages, a sign that cannot be produced by epilepsy or mental illness. We have many instances of the possessed person being questioned in languages they did not know and either responding correctly in English or in that language. We also have many instances of the possessed person speaking or writing in languages they do not know. Second, the possessed person often mentions or recounts the details of the lives of people present. This is usually the priests, but if they think they can drive away others, they will try. They also seem to enjoy mocking people who do not believe in them by recounting their secret sins. Third, the possessed can tell what is blessed and what is not. They will refuse to touch or drink a water bottle that has been secretly blessed, and be fine with others that have not. They can name the saint's relic you have in your pocket, and they will avoid the chair that has a few grains of blessed salt lost in the carpet under it. Fourth and finally, people can have an amazing strength when possessed. This does not happen in each case, but when it does, it is clearly not human. A mother might lift a car off her child in a single burst of adrenaline, but the possessed keep it up for hours, long past when a normal body would collapse. The old rite also has what is often called a minor exorcism. This is an expansion on the original prayer to St. Michael, written by Pope Leo XIII. That original prayer is much longer than the St. Michael prayer, said so often today, and could originally only be said by priests. The original intent was to combat Freemasonry, which was attempting to destroy the church in the late 19th century. This minor exorcism is usually used for houses or land, as well as particular objects that may be cursed, which is simply the opposite of blessed, with the object having been given over in some way to the demonic. Exorcising a house is usually completed in 1 or 2 visits, much faster than a person. The minor exorcism is also sometimes used as a diagnostic for possession, as it usually causes demons to manifest in a possessed person so the signs of possession can be evaluated. The Church also intervenes for souls in purgatory that signal their need for prayer, often called a haunting. These, quote, poor souls, as they are called, are those who passed their judgment to go to heaven, but still have imperfections left over from the sins in their life. These imperfections are resolved in purgatory, which takes time. We can speed up that process by offering prayers and masses for them. Unlike demons, poor souls do not talk with the living or respond to spirit communication, such as ghost hunters or Ouija boards. It is a serious sin to call up the dead to talk with them, which is called necromancy in Scripture. The most common places where we see poor soul activity are churches, rectories, monasteries, and places where murders or suicides happened. Poor souls are usually helped in one visit by prayers for them, and they do not recur after that. Spiritually, exorcisms are the work of the entire church, but in the physical world they are performed by real individuals. In fact, those of us involved in exorcism ministry on a regular basis become well known to the demonic and seemingly hated more by them. And it goes the other way, too. We meet the same fallen angels over and over in different cases over the years. Sometimes, as in my case, Satan becomes directly involved in trying to tempt and destroy a person who is involved in opposing his kingdom on earth. This is not a concern for the person seeking to serve God as well as possible, as God is the Creator. Satan is merely a creature, and God is in control of him, as with all other creatures. Hollywood would have us believe that Satan is an independent operator, even a charming and misunderstood figure, vastly powerful and free to do whatever he wants. The truth is far from that. Satan is a fallen angel who was created at the beginning of time with the other angels, then banished from heaven for his disobedience. He chose to be permanently cut off from God. Now he is relegated to serving God in spite of himself, tempting mankind, and thereby providing the spiritual struggles that lead to spiritual strengthening. He is just a fallen angel, not a god, and certainly not even a millionth as powerful as the Creator of the universe. As a mere creature, like us, he relies on the will of God to remain in existence at each moment, and on the permissive will of God to take any action. We see this clearly spelled out in the book of Job, and in the interactions of the demons with Jesus. In the exorcism of the Gerasene demoniac in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, verses 1 through 20, they even must ask permission to go into the pigs. What a sad state compared to the heaven they gave up. But give it up they did. They do not want pity, and they do not want to repent. They only want to tempt, to oppress, and to possess as many people as possible in order to stop them from making it back to God. Part 1. Introduction to Another World, in which I discover the reality of the demonic through the fakeness of reality TV and see things I never expected. Chapter 1. Modern Spiritualism and the Paranormal TV Craze. Spiritualism, the act of seeking communication with the spirits of the dead, known in Scripture as necromancy, has always been with humankind. It can take the form of asking the dead to make some manifestation, like to make a noise, to appear as a ghost, or to speak to or through a living person, often called a medium, or, in ancient times, sorcerer. Sometimes the interaction is more indirect, such as interpreting random events thought to be influenced by spirits to divine the future. Most cultures see spiritualism as a form of magic that can only be performed by people with secret knowledge or who possess spiritual gifts of some kind, or both. In many cultures, spiritualism, and magic in general, is distrusted, and the people who practice it are pushed to the margins of society. For Jews and Christians, spiritualism is strongly forbidden altogether. Appealing to any spirit other than God is an appeal to a mere creature, and an insult to the Creator. We see this reflected in a number of Old Testament verses. First, we have 2 verses warning the Jews not to adopt the spiritual practices of the people living in the Promised Land, and which address how God feels about turning to created spirits for guidance. When you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to imitate the abominations of the nations there. Let there not be found among you anyone who causes their son or daughter to pass through the fire, or practices divination, or is a soothsayer, augur, or sorcerer, or who casts spells, consults ghosts and spirits, or seeks oracles from the dead. Anyone who does such things is an abomination to the Lord, and because of such abominations the Lord your God is dispossessing them before you. You must be altogether sincere with the Lord your God. Although these nations whom you are about to dispossess listen to their soothsayers and diviners, the Lord your God will not permit you to do so. A prophet like me will the Lord your God raise up for you from among your own kindred. That is the one to whom you shall listen. Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 9 through 15. Should anyone turn to ghosts and spirits and prostitute oneself with them, I will turn against that person and cut such a one off from among the people. Leviticus chapter 20, verse 6. The word abomination means a thing that causes disgust and hatred. We also learn that God will withdraw his gifts from the person who engages in conjuring the spirits of the dead, thereby dispossessing them. Here are two more warnings, one that warns such acts defile us, and one that warns of the consequences. Do not turn to ghosts or consult spirits by which you will be defiled. I, the Lord, am your God. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 31. And when they say to you, inquire of ghosts and soothsayers who chirp and mutter, should not a people inquire of their gods, consulting the dead on behalf of the living, for instruction and testimony? Surely those who speak like this are the ones for whom there is no dawn. He will pass through it hard-pressed and hungry, and when hungry shall become enraged, and curse king and gods. He will look upward, and will gaze at the earth, but will see only distress and darkness, oppressive gloom, murky, without light. Isaiah chapter 8, verses 19 through 22. The person ends up deprived of the good things in life, as well as hungry and angry. They curse the gods they have chosen to follow and see the world through a pall of depression and gloom. The first of the 10 Commandments, which are themselves a summary of the 613 Judaic laws, reinforces the importance of not turning to spirits other than God. Here it is given in Exodus. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall not have other gods beside me. Exodus chapter 20, verses 2 through 3. And when Jesus is asked what the most important commandment is, he responds. He said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 through 38. So we learn that the Old Testament prohibition against seeking communication with ghosts and spirits is strong, and Jesus affirms this by stating that the most important commandment is to love God alone. To seek information, consolation, or power from a spirit other than God is to treat that spirit like a god, and to cease to fully trust and love the true God completely. Nevertheless, the Jews of the Old Testament did go on to adopt some of the gods, beliefs, and spiritual practices of the Canaanites. For them, and for modern people, the lure of information, power, and consolation was powerful. It is apparently easy to forget God's warning against these spirits, that what they provide is a sham that eventually leads to deprivation, anger, distress, and spiritual darkness. Fast forward to the 19th century. In 1848, the Fox sisters, 11-year-old Kate and 14-year-old Maggie, were living in Hydesville, New York. They started scamming their parents in this way. Related by Maggie 40 years later, after their careers as, quote, mediums had ended. When we went to bed at night, we used to tie an apple to a string and move the string up and down, causing the apple to bump on the floor, or we would drop the apple on the floor, making a strange noise every time it would rebound. Mother listened to this for a time. She would not understand it and did not suspect us as being capable of a trick because we were so young. By pulling the string, the girls could make the, quote, spirits that haunted the house answer questions. 1 thud for no, 2 for yes, and so on. Well, word started to spread. It is important to understand that there was no common idea of mediums, psychics, or the paranormal at the time. There certainly have always been ghost stories and attempts to conjure the dead, as we said, but a spirit performing on demand like this was new. As their act developed, the, quote, spirit claimed to be a man who had been murdered in the house. The townsfolk searched for someone who had lived in the house previously. Maggie related later, Finally, they found a man by the name of Bell, and they said that this poor innocent man had committed a murder in the house and that the noises had come from the spirit of the murdered person. Poor Bell was shunned and looked upon by the whole community as a murderer. By their simple deception, the Fox sisters started the first modern wave of spiritualism in the Western world. They triggered the emergence of an entire industry of charlatans who claimed to have on-demand contact with the dead, and almost always for a fee. In a time before television, it became popular to hire a medium to communicate with your dead loved ones, or for people to mimic their methods at home themselves. In addition to the common people's interest in spiritualism, the wealthy got involved. The Society for Psychical Research, or SPR, was founded in 1882 in London to research spiritualism and related phenomena, such as extrasensory perception, from a more scientific perspective. Prominent members included, ironically enough, Sherlock Holmes author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In spite of this, a lot of their work consisted of accepting and cataloging ghost stories from the public. Some magicians of the day, particularly Harry Houdini, made it their mission to discredit and debunk spiritualism and everything related. Meanwhile, 2 years after Maggie's confession in 1890 that the Fox sisters' thudding house spirit was a hoax, Elijah Bond submitted his patent for the board and planchette that would be known as the Ouija board. This made spiritualism even more accessible for the average family. At the same time, the mysterious, the Eastern, and the occult were in vogue. Egyptology became all the rage in Europe, and even satanic-themed organizations like the Hellfire Club gained notoriety. Then World War I came, leaving countless families bereft and longing for their lost loved ones. This caused a surge of interest in communicating with the dead. Margaret Murray was an amateur anthropologist who had an interest in ancient religions. During the war, she developed her witch cult hypothesis, which held that Christianity had stamped out an older pagan religion devoted to a horned god. In her theoretical religion, the women were led by one man who played the role of the horned god, and each year he was killed and replaced by a new man. Her theory proposed that the women performed various kinds of magic and recounted their activity to the man once a year. This theory gained attention, even leading to an article in the Encyclopedia Britannica, the ultimate authority at the time. Her article ran for 40 years, until her theory was discredited. But by the time the encyclopedia wrote a retraction, it was too late. The modern idea of witches had been established in the culture. One of the people who bought into her theory was Gerald Gardner, the father of modern witchcraft. He called his system witchcraft and the people who practiced it Wiccans. He thought he found a group of people practicing Margaret's ancient religion in 1930s England, and so he combined their ideas with what he learned from other occult groups, creating his own religion. In 1954 he wrote Witchcraft Today, which got some attention, but he remained obscure. It was when he appeared on the BBC that the world learned that there were real people claiming to be witches. Largely due to him, there was a wave of interest in witchcraft, Satanism, and the occult in the 1960s, particularly in cinema. Today, despite being concocted less than a century ago and being based on a bogus theory, Wicca is widely recognized as a legitimate religion, and it still claims to have ancient roots. After the 1970s, there was a lull in mainstream interest in the occult. The reasons are hard to pin down. Perhaps it was the prosperity, security, and materialism of the 80s and 90s, combined with mounting confidence in strictly scientific explanations for everything. But this lull did not last, and soon television ushered in a new era of interest in spiritualism. It is hard to imagine a time when there were no television shows chronicling the paranormal, but it all started in 2004 with Ghost Hunters. At that time, I was in graduate school for adult clinical psychology at Penn State and working in a brainwave research lab. It was not at all mainstream to be involved in spiritualism, and the idea of ghost hunting was off most people's radar. There were those who were interested, of course, but spiritualism was very much a niche topic. The TV show Ghost Hunters featured two normal people trying to investigate sites of hauntings with modern technology. Gone was the Ouija board and the medium, replaced by the digital recorder and night vision cameras. Within a few years, there were a few more ghost hunting shows, and soon they were all over cable television. The next wave of spiritualism had started. I had been trained in diagnosis of mental illness and had treated a number of cases in our training clinic. I had also seen research on hypnosis that demonstrated that the otherwise healthy brain can produce hallucinations on command if a person is especially susceptible to hypnosis. When I noticed the paranormal TV shows, I did some research into the psychological literature, curious as to whether this alleged paranormal activity was just a hallucination, mild mental illness, scam, or perhaps something spiritual. I became the staff advisor to a paranormal research group at Penn State, and I learned some of the history of ghost hunting and the ideas around it. Soon I was able to go visit a few cases where people complained of strange events in their houses. It ended up leading me on the surprising path to exorcisms that has defined my life. Chapter 2. A Clueless Encounter. Hypnosis is one of the last real mysteries of psychology and brain science. We still do not know exactly what it is or how it works. The ability to be hypnotized does not seem to serve any useful function. In fact, hypnosis seems only to make people vulnerable to the influence of others, and certainly less aware of their environment while they are entranced. The popular and reassuring myths about hypnosis, that you cannot be hypnotized against your will, or that you cannot be made to do harm to yourself or others, are just not true. The brainwave lab I worked in during graduate school had been studying hypnosis for many years, and so I read much of the scientific literature on it. In the 1960s, there were many studies that today would be, rightly, considered unethical. These studies included hypnotizing people to reach into a box with a rattlesnake, defanged, but they did not know that, to reach into what they thought was a bowl of acid, and to pick up a revolver and attempt to shoot someone. It was not a functioning gun and was unloaded. Modern stage hypnotists downplay the potential power of hypnosis and claim it is harmless. They usually perform what is more akin to a group power of suggestion exercise rather than a deep hypnotic trance. What seems to be true is that you either are hypnotizable or you are not. Most people are somewhat hypnotizable. Some are completely unresponsive to hypnosis, and some fall deeply into a trance and can be made to hallucinate on command. It is a trait that is consistent across one's lifespan. If you test as highly hypnotizable in adolescence, you will still do so when you are 60. On the other hand, if you can't be hypnotized, there is no way to learn how to be. You can learn to respond to suggestions, but a real hypnotic trance that can produce strong false experiences is different. I learned group and individual hypnosis for our lab studies. I did my master's on changes in brain organization during shifts in consciousness while experiencing a hypnotic trance, and I used hypnosis in a few clinical settings when it seemed indicated. I was not a big fan of hypnosis clinically, as I thought it was usually better to work with the conscious mind than the unconscious. I did see that hypnosis, if used very carefully, can be used to recover memories of events the conscious mind had forgotten. There is, however, a great danger of using leading questions and subtle suggestions to cause the mind to manufacture false memories of events that never happened. This is because the entranced person's mind is responsive to any suggestion and will attempt to comply with them. That is what led to most of the false memory cases that caused the satanic panic in the 1990s. The second haunted house case I participated in was about 2 hours from Penn State, where a couple was renting an older house in a rougher part of town. They had lived there for several years and had experienced problems for most of that time. They saw black smoky forms moving through the house, heard inexplicable loud bangs, had objects go missing only to return days later in very odd locations in the house, and even experienced the sensation of being grabbed and thrown down the stairs by seemingly nothing. The local newspaper had come and written about the haunting for the paper, including a photo of what looked like a ball of solid black smoke, a little smaller than a basketball. This had appeared the instant a loud bang occurred, which scared the reporters so badly they took that one picture and left. I arrived at the house earlier than everyone else on a hot summer day. The couple took me on a tour to point out where various events.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?